The sirens began again, long and broken, echoing through the mountains like a dying animal's cry. Maria pressed her hands against her children's ears, but the sound still found them, trembling through the floor, rattling the glassless windowpanes, whispering of death. Luca clung to her arm, small fingers gripping tight. Rosa whimpered softly in her lap. Dust drifted from the ceiling each time the ground quivered. The war was close again, too close. For weeks, the little village of San Lorenzo had lived like this, crouched in darkness, waiting. The Germans had passed through days ago, retreating north toward Cassino, leaving only burned trucks, broken walls, and buried mines behind. They had taken everything they could, bread, livestock, even blankets. What they could not carry, they destroyed. The men of the village were gone, some drafted, others executed or vanished in the confusion of retreat. Those who remained were women, old men, and children, shadows surviving among ruins. Maria had stopped counting the days since her husband, Matteo, was taken. He'd been accused of hiding a partisan. They shot him in the olive grove behind their house, where the trees still stood blackened by gunfire. Every morning, she tried not to look that way. Every night, she dreamt of it anyway. Now she sat in what used to be their cellar, a space of damp stone and mildew that stank of smoke and fear. It was the only place that still felt safe, though safety was a word that had lost its meaning. She had 2 small loaves of barley bread left, hard, gray things that could break a tooth, and a jar of cloudy water she rationed by the sip. Rosa's face had grown pale and thin, her eyes too large for her face. Luca had stopped talking altogether. Hunger had silenced him. Above them, the air quivered again, distant thunder, but not from the sky. Artillery. Somewhere beyond the ridge. Maria listened to the rhythm of explosions, trying to guess which direction they came from. Sometimes it was impossible to tell. Sound twisted in the valleys, so what seemed far could be near, and what seemed near could already be gone. When the noise faded, she crept up the narrow steps to the surface. The street outside lay empty, a gray river of dust and rubble. Once, there had been shops here, a fountain, laughter. Now the fountain lay cracked and dry, its marble figures headless. The church's bell tower leaned like an old man too tired to stand. Old Signora de Luca was kneeling in the middle of the road, gathering scattered pieces of wheat from the dirt. She looked up when she saw Maria and forced a brittle smile. "They say the Americans are close," the old woman said. Her voice was almost a whisper, hoarse from disuse. Maria didn't answer. Rumors had been coming with every explosion: the Allies were landing in Naples, the Germans were fleeing north, the war would end soon. But each rumor only brought more fighting, more bodies, and more silence afterward. "Americans," Maria finally said. "Do you think they'll be different?" Signora de Luca shrugged. "They have chocolate, they say. And they don't shoot children." Maria wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe in anything that wasn't hunger or loss. But she remembered the Germans' first arrival, how polite they had been at first, how they'd smiled, handing out candies to children before the arrests began. She had learned not to trust men with weapons, no matter what language they spoke. She turned back toward the cellar. As she descended, Rosa stirred weakly on the blanket that served as their bed. "Mama," the little girl murmured, "I'm hungry." Maria swallowed. "Soon, my love. Soon." She didn't know what "soon" meant anymore. Hours passed in silence. The air in the cellar grew thick, heavy with the smell of damp earth and unwashed bodies. Luca traced lines in the dust with his finger. He used to draw birds, sunflowers, the sea he'd never seen. Now his drawings were only lines, endless, looping lines that led nowhere. When the night came, Maria risked a candle. Its flame painted trembling light on the walls, revealing a photograph pinned above the wine casks, Matteo in his soldier's uniform, smiling awkwardly, his hand resting on her shoulder. She stared at it for a long time, feeling the old ache stir inside her. "Would you have fed them?" she whispered to the picture. "The ones who killed you?" No answer came, only the far-off rumble of tanks. The next morning, she awoke to a new sound, one she hadn't heard in months. Engines. Not the harsh grind of German trucks but a deeper, steadier growl. She froze. Luka lifted his head. "Mama?" "Quiet," she whispered. The engines grew louder, echoing off the hills. There were voices too, shouted orders, strange words she didn't understand. Not German. Not Italian either. Then, for the first time in weeks, she heard laughter. Sharp, foreign, echoing through the ruins. Maria crawled up the steps again, heart hammering. She pressed her eye to the narrow crack of the cellar door. Down the street, shapes moved through the dust, figures in heavy helmets, carrying rifles. Their uniforms were a different color, not the gray of the Germans but green and brown, mottled like forest shadows. They were taller, broader. On their shoulders gleamed a white star. Americans. For a moment she couldn't breathe. She expected shooting, orders barked, boots kicking indoors. But the soldiers moved carefully, scanning windows, calling softly to one another. One of them, a man with a tired face and dirt streaked across his jaw, stopped in front of the church. He looked around at the ruined square and shook his head slowly, as if what he saw hurt him. Maria ducked back into the cellar, clutching her children to her chest. "Stay quiet," she whispered. "Don't move." But curiosity burned stronger than fear. After minutes that felt like hours, she crept up again. The soldiers had gathered in the square. They spoke in low voices, pointing at the fountain, the cracked roofs, the smoke rising from beyond the hills. One of them pulled something from his pocket, a small, dark rectangle, and knelt down. A boy appeared from behind a wall, barefoot and filthy. He couldn't have been older than 10. The soldiers froze, guns half raised. The boy didn't move. He only stared. Then the kneeling soldier held out his hand. The object gleamed in the sunlight, a chocolate bar, wrapped in silver. The boy hesitated, then ran forward, snatched it, and ran back behind the wall. The soldiers laughed, softly, not mockingly. Maria felt something break open inside her chest. She had forgotten what laughter sounded like when it wasn't cruel. The boy returned moments later, chewing greedily, his mouth smeared with brown. Another soldier handed him a canteen of water. Soon, more children appeared, their faces hollow but eyes wide. The soldiers began passing out tins, crackers, bits of candy. No one shouted, no one threatened. It was quiet, almost reverent. Maria felt Rosa stir behind her. "What is it, Mama?" She wanted to say it was a miracle, but the word felt too fragile. "They're giving food," she said instead. Rosa blinked. "To us?" "I don't know." The sound of footsteps came closer. Someone was walking toward the cellar. Maria's breath caught. She pulled the children close, praying they wouldn't make a sound. The steps stopped just outside the door. She could see a shadow, broad shoulders, a rifle slung across the back. Then, gently, a voice spoke in accented Italian. "Is anyone here? We won't hurt you." She didn't move. The silence stretched. Then the voice came again, quieter. "We have food." Something inside her rebelled against it. It was too strange, too impossible. But hunger was stronger than disbelief. Slowly, she pushed open the door. The soldier stepped back as she emerged into the light, blinking against the sun. He was young, maybe 30, with pale eyes and a face lined by exhaustion. He held a can in one hand, a small silver-wrapped bar in the other. When he saw the children behind her, his expression changed, something like sorrow flickering across it. He knelt and held out the chocolate. Rosa stared at it, unsure. Luca hid behind Maria's skirt. "It's safe," the man said softly. His Italian was broken but kind. "For them." Maria hesitated only a second before taking it. The wrapper was warm from his hand. She broke it into pieces, giving each child a square. They bit down, and their faces changed, the first smile she'd seen in months. Rosa laughed, a sound so light it almost didn't belong to the same world. The soldier smiled faintly. "Good," he said, nodding. "Good." Then he turned to go, calling something to the others. Maria wanted to say thank you, but the words stuck. Gratitude was heavy, dangerous, it meant believing in something again. Still, she watched them as they moved down the street, helping the old woman with the wheat, offering bread to another child. They looked out of place among the ruins, like color bleeding back into a black and white world. When they were gone, the silence returned, but it was different now, not empty, but waiting. That night, Maria shared the last crumbs of chocolate with her children. The sweetness lingered long after the taste was gone. Outside, the engines rumbled again, heading north toward the front. She knew they might never return. She knew tomorrow could bring gunfire or bombs again. But for the first time in months, she let herself hope. As she blew out the candle, she heard Rosa whisper drowsily, "Mama, the men with stars. Will they come back?" Maria looked toward the window, where moonlight touched the broken stones. "I think so," she said softly. "I think they will." She lay awake long after the children slept, listening to the wind move through the ruined streets. Somewhere far away, another explosion rolled across the mountains, but it felt distant now, like the echo of another life. She closed her eyes and thought of the soldier's face, the way he had knelt before her children as if they were sacred. War had taken everything, home, husband, safety, but in that single gesture, something small and precious had been returned, the reminder that mercy could still exist. When morning came, she found a dented tin can on the steps of the cellar. Inside was half a loaf of bread, still warm. She stared at it for a long time before touching it, afraid it might vanish. Then she smiled through tears. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel afraid. She felt alive. And as she tore the bread into pieces for Luca and Rosa, she whispered the word she'd forgotten how to say. "Grazie." The hills answered with silence, but in that silence, Maria heard the promise of something she had thought lost forever, hope waiting just beyond the sound of war. The road into San Lorenzo was narrow, twisting through the hills like a scar. The American convoy moved slowly, engines growling beneath the weight of dust and exhaustion. Sergeant William Carter sat in the lead jeep, his rifle resting across his knees, eyes scanning the ridges above. The world here looked burned, olive trees splintered, farmhouses gutted, fields turned to ash. He had seen towns like this before, but each one cut a little deeper. You couldn't get used to ruin. You could only pass through it and hope it didn't stay with you. Private Morales sat beside him, chewing on a piece of gum gone tasteless hours ago. "Feels like the end of the world," he muttered. Carter didn't answer. His throat was dry, his thoughts heavier than his gear. They had lost 3 men outside Casino last week, ambushed in the rain. Good men. He could still see one of them, Daniels, lying in the mud, staring at nothing while the medics screamed for morphine they didn't have. Since then, Carter had spoken less and watched more. The radio crackled in the back seat. "Eagle Unit, keep formation. We're moving into Sector 12. Eyes sharp, locals may be hiding Krauts in the ruins." Carter tapped the receiver once to acknowledge. "Orders. Always orders. Keep moving, keep clearing, keep surviving." He wondered if anyone back home could imagine what that meant, how survival became its own kind of sin. The convoy rolled into the village square. It wasn't much of a square anymore, just broken cobblestones and the blackened shell of a church. The fountain in the center stood dry and cracked, its stone angels shattered. For a long moment, no one spoke. "Looks empty," Morales said, but even he didn't sound sure. "Nothing's ever empty," Carter replied. He raised his hand, and the line of trucks slowed to a halt. "Fan out. Check the buildings. Watch for traps." The men moved carefully, boots crunching on glass and bone-white dust. Every sound echoed. The war had made them all ghosts, walking, whispering, waiting. Carter pushed open the door of what used to be a bakery. The smell of ash clung to the walls. Flour bags were torn open, the contents mixed with soot. He stepped over a fallen beam and found a child's toy beneath it, a wooden horse, one leg burned away. He picked it up without thinking, brushing off the char. The absurdity of it almost made him laugh. They were fighting for towns that no longer existed, for people who might already be dead. He put the toy back where he found it and turned toward the street. "All clear," he called out. His voice felt too loud. Morales appeared from a nearby alley, motioning with his rifle. "Sarge, over here." Carter followed. Behind the church, a cellar door hung crooked on its hinges. Someone had been here recently, the dirt showed footprints, small ones. He motioned for Morales to cover him, then eased the door open. The darkness inside smelled of smoke and damp stone. "Hello?" he said softly. "Anyone here?" At first, nothing. Then a whisper of movement, a rustle, a breath. Carter raised his flashlight, its weak beam cutting through the gloom. Two wide eyes blinked back at him. A boy, thin as a reed, clutching something wrapped in a cloth. Beside him, a woman crouched protectively, her face gaunt, her clothes streaked with dust. A smaller child clung to her skirt. Carter froze. Civilians. He lowered his weapon slowly. "We're not Germans," he said, trying to keep his Italian steady. "Americani. You're safe." The woman didn't move. Her gaze flicked to his rifle, then back to his face. The boy said something too quiet to hear. Carter took a step forward and set his flashlight on the ground, palms open. "No harm," he said. "Food." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a ration tin. The woman's eyes followed it, hungry but wary. Carter opened it, scooped a bit of the cold beans with his fingers, and tasted it himself. Then he set the tin down and backed away. The boy moved first. He darted forward, snatched the tin, and retreated to his mother. Carter saw her hesitate only a second before she began feeding the little one from the spoon. The sound of soft eating filled the silence. Morales exhaled behind him. "Jesus," he whispered. "They're starving." Carter nodded. "Tell the others to hold position. Nobody fires unless fired on." They left food and water before pulling back into the open air. Morales wiped his face with his sleeve. "You think command's gonna like that?" "They don't have to know," Carter said. "You really think it's our job to feed them? We're short on rations as it is." Carter looked toward the hills, where the smoke of retreating German artillery blurred the horizon. "Our job," he said quietly, "is to make sure we're not the monsters they say we are." Later, when the platoon gathered near the fountain, the men were restless. Hunger and fear made tempers short. Private Leland lit a cigarette and said, "We should have moved on. Those civvies could have been scouts." "Scouts don't carry babies," Morales snapped. "Doesn't matter," Leland said. "You start handing out food, word spreads. Next village will mob us." Carter crouched by the fountain, tracing a finger through the dust. "You see any Germans around here?" Leland hesitated. "No, sir." "Then we're staying for the night. Double watch, no fires." He looked up at the darkening sky. "They've had enough running. So have we." That night, the village was quiet except for the low hum of distant artillery. The men took turns on watch while others cleaned their rifles or stared into the dark. Morales sat beside Carter, passing him a piece of gum. "You ever think about home, Sarge?" "Not lately. I keep thinking about my kid sister. She'd be about Rosa's age." "Rosa?" "The little girl in the cellar," Morales said. "Didn't you hear her mother call her?" Carter shook his head. "No names. Names make it harder." "Harder than this?" Morales gestured to the ruins. "We're already in hell." Carter didn't answer. He took the gum, chewed once, and stared at the broken church across the square. The moonlight touched its roof like a ghost. He thought of the woman's eyes, half-starved, half-defiant, and of how she'd looked at him when he said, "safe." He wondered if she'd believed it. Before dawn, a sound woke them, footsteps, light but fast. Carter was on his feet instantly, rifle up. From behind the corner, the same boy appeared, panting, clutching something under his arm. Morales aimed his weapon. "Hold fire," Carter said. The boy approached slowly, glancing around as if afraid. He stopped a few feet away and held out what he carried, a loaf of bread, still warm. Carter blinked. The boy pushed it toward him, murmuring something in Italian. Carter didn't catch the words, but he understood. Gratitude. He took the bread, nodding once. The boy smiled faintly and ran off again into the ruins. For a long time, no one spoke. "Well, I'll be damned," Morales said softly. Carter broke the loaf in half and handed a piece to him. "Eat," he said. "We'll call it fair trade." By midday, the radio buzzed again with orders. The platoon was to move north, toward the next valley, to secure the road against retreating German forces. They packed what little gear they had left, filled their canteens from the cracked fountain, and climbed into the trucks. As they pulled away, Carter glanced back. In the doorway of the cellar stood the woman, Maria. He knew her name now, though she hadn't spoken it. Rosa was in her arms, Luca at her side. They didn't wave, but they didn't hide either. For a few seconds, their eyes met across the distance, a silent exchange of something that felt bigger than language. The convoy wound up the hill. Morales turned in his seat. "Think they'll be okay?" Carter didn't answer right away. "They'll have to be. Hell of a thing, Sarge. Feeding strangers in a war." "Yeah," Carter said, watching the horizon shift from gray to smoke blue. "But maybe that's what makes us human." They drove on through the mountains, past burned fields and the carcasses of tanks left to rust in ditches. Every mile north felt heavier. The road grew narrower, the air colder. At one point, they passed a farmhouse still smoldering. Carter ordered the trucks to stop. Inside, they found two bodies, German soldiers, young, maybe 18. One still held a photograph in his hand, a girl smiling beside a river. Morales knelt beside him, muttering a prayer. "They look like kids," he said. "They are," Carter replied. He took the photo from the dead soldier's hand and placed it gently on his chest. "We all are." The men buried the bodies behind the farmhouse, marking the spot with a cross of broken boards. Then they moved on. By the time they reached the ridge overlooking the next valley, the sun was sinking again. Smoke rose from somewhere ahead, another village, another ruin waiting to be named. Carter's stomach turned at the thought of what they'd find there. But as the trucks halted for the night, he reached into his pack and found a small square of silver foil tucked inside, what remained of the chocolate he'd given the children. He hadn't put it there. He looked around, wondering who had slipped it back. Morales caught his glance and shrugged. "Maybe it's from them," he said. "A reminder." Carter turned the wrapper over in his fingers. It glimmered faintly in the fading light. For a moment, he thought he could smell sweetness beneath the smoke. As darkness settled, he sat beside the road, listening to the mountains breathe. The men around him fell silent one by one, lost in their own ghosts. He thought of Maria, of the boy with the bread, of the little girl's laughter echoing faintly through the ruins. He thought of what it meant to be a stranger in a country torn apart by strangers. The night wind carried the sound of distant gunfire. He stood, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. Tomorrow they'd move again. More orders. More miles. But something inside him had shifted, a quiet resolve he couldn't name. For the first time since the war began, Carter felt that their march wasn't only about taking ground, it was about giving something back to it. When he lay down at last beneath the cold Italian stars, he still held the silver wrapper in his hand. It caught the moonlight and shimmered faintly, like a promise not yet fulfilled. Rain fell in thin, cold lines, whispering against the stones of San Lorenzo. It had been 3 days since the Americans came back. Their arrival was quieter this time, no roaring engines, no shouted orders. Just weary men stepping down from trucks, shoulders hunched beneath the drizzle, eyes scanning the gray horizon. Sergeant William Carter was the first to step into the square. The place looked different now, less like a graveyard and more like something halfway alive. Smoke curled from chimneys again. The fountain still stood dry, but someone had placed flowers on its rim, wild daisies, stubborn and bright. Maria saw them before they saw her. She had been collecting water in a rusted pail near the church, Rosa perched sleepily against her hip. When she recognized the man in the green uniform, she froze. He looked thinner, older. But when he turned and saw her, his tired face softened. "Buongiorno," he said awkwardly. The Italian word sounded heavy in his mouth, but the warmth was real. Maria nodded. "You came back." Carter looked around, as if unsure of the answer. "Guess we did." Behind him, Morales waved at Luca, who was peeking shyly from behind a doorway. The boy's face lit up in recognition. He ran forward, clutching something wrapped in cloth, a small loaf of bread. Morales crouched to accept it like a sacred gift. "Best welcome I've had all war," he said, grinning. The men unpacked near the church ruins, setting up a small camp. Their orders were simple: hold the ridge until the next division arrived. But nothing about this war stayed simple for long. That night, the soldiers shared their rations with the villagers again. They tried to make it seem routine, a gesture without consequence, but it was anything but ordinary. Each tin of beans passed from soldier to civilian felt like a quiet rebellion against the world that had forced them all to hunger. The men joked softly as they handed out food, but beneath the laughter, Carter could feel the ache of their guilt, knowing that every bite they gave away left them hungrier themselves. Maria served them what little she had in return, a thin soup made from chestnuts and rainwater, stretched enough for everyone to taste. The soldiers pretended it was rich and warm. Morales even closed his eyes after the first spoonful. "Best thing I've eaten since Naples," he declared. The children giggled. As the night deepened, a fragile rhythm settled between the two groups. The soldiers taught the children English words: "Hello, thank you, friend." The children repeated them carefully, laughing at the strange sounds. Rosa learned the fastest, her small voice carried through the square, bright as the rain. Carter watched her, smiling despite himself. "She's got spirit," he said. Maria looked at him, her expression somewhere between gratitude and grief. "She doesn't remember enough to be afraid," she replied. Her words lingered in the air. When the laughter faded, Carter sat beside the fountain, notebook in hand. He hadn't written home in weeks, not since Casino. He tore a page from the back and began again. "Dear Anna," he wrote. "Today we fed a village. I don't know if that means we're winning, but it felt like something worth fighting for." He stopped, tapping the pencil against the paper. Rain smeared the ink. He closed the book. By morning, word reached them of German patrols moving through the nearby hills. The lieutenant ordered tighter watches and reminded everyone that fraternization with civilians was strictly forbidden. Carter listened without a word, his jaw set. Morales muttered afterward, "They'd rather we shoot them than feed them." "Orders don't always come from people who've been hungry," Carter said quietly. The soldiers obeyed in name only. When night fell again, they met in the ruins of the bakery, passing food beneath the cracked roof where the smell of ash still lingered. Maria was there too, wrapping portions of bread in scraps of cloth for other families too afraid to come out. "Why risk it?" Carter asked her once. She shrugged. "Because no one else will." He wanted to argue, but he saw the answer in her face, the same mix of courage and exhaustion he saw every time he looked at his men. He realized then that she wasn't just surviving. She was fighting, in her own quiet way. The rain finally stopped on the fourth day, leaving the air clean and cold. The mountains beyond the village gleamed with snow. Carter stood on the ridge with Morales, scanning the valley below. Smoke rose from a distant grove. "Could be Germans," Morales said. "Could be farmers," Carter replied. They didn't get to find out. At dusk, a runner from the next company arrived, breathless and mud-smeared. "Patrol sighted enemy scouts west of here," he said. "They're testing our line. Command wants all civilians sheltered immediately." The words hit Carter like a blow. "The village? They'll pass through or burn it. Depends how desperate they are." Carter didn't wait for permission. He and Morales ran down the slope toward San Lorenzo, shouting orders in broken Italian. Families scattered, clutching what they could carry. Maria grabbed Rosa and Luca, guiding them toward the old wine cellar. The sound came soon after, the distant thunder of artillery, the guttural snarl of engines. German voices echoed through the hills. Carter positioned his men near the church ruins, rifles ready. He felt the familiar chill of fear crawl up his spine, the kind that sharpened everything, every smell, every breath, every heartbeat. "Here they come," Morales said. The first shots shattered the air. Bullets struck the stones around them, sparks flashing in the dark. Carter shouted for cover. The men fired back, muzzle flares lighting their faces in bursts. Smoke filled the square, thick and choking. The church bell, cracked but still hanging, swayed and rang with each impact, a terrible, beautiful sound that mixed with the cries of the living and the dead. Through the chaos, Carter saw movement near the cellar, the place where Maria and the children were hiding. A German soldier was approaching, weapon raised. Carter didn't think. He broke from cover, sprinting across the open square. Bullets screamed past him. He tackled the soldier before he could fire, the two of them crashing into the mud. They struggled, rolling, fists and fury and fear. The German's hand found his pistol. Carter struck first, hard, again, until the man went still. He staggered to his feet, breath ragged, and turned toward the cellar. Maria was there, clutching Rosa, her eyes wide. He shouted for her to stay down. Behind him, the battle raged, gunfire, screams, the relentless pounding of artillery from the ridge. Morales appeared, dragging a wounded man. "We're outnumbered," he yelled. "We need to pull back." "Not yet," Carter shouted. "We hold until the civilians are clear." The order cost them minutes they couldn't afford. One by one, his men fell back toward the eastern wall. Carter fired until his rifle clicked empty, then grabbed another from the ground. The air was thick with cordite and dust. A shell struck the church. The explosion lifted him off his feet, threw him hard against the cobblestones. His ears rang. Through the haze, he saw Morales struggling to stand, blood running down his arm. The bell swung wildly above them, ringing like a final prayer. "Go!" Carter shouted. "Get them out." Morales hesitated, then nodded and limped toward the cellar. Carter covered him, firing blindly into the smoke. A flash, a scream, then silence. When the smoke finally cleared, the square was unrecognizable, half the buildings collapsed, the air thick with dust and rain. The Germans were gone, driven off by the arrival of Allied reinforcements. But the victory felt hollow. Too many bodies lay still among the stones. Carter staggered toward the cellar. Inside, Maria crouched beside the children. They were alive, though Rosa's face was streaked with soot and tears. Morales lay nearby, his chest rising and falling shallowly. "He saved us," Maria said. Carter knelt beside his friend. Morales opened his eyes, a faint smile breaking through the blood. "Told you we were in hell," he whispered. "Yeah," Carter said softly. "But maybe we made a little heaven in it." Morales chuckled once, then stilled. The silence that followed was heavier than the smoke. Carter sat back, the ache in his chest deeper than any wound. He looked at Maria and the children, at the ruin around them, and felt something inside him harden, not into hate, but resolve. He couldn't bring back the dead. But he could keep these few alive. By dawn, the rain had stopped again. The survivors gathered what they could. The Americans buried their dead beside the church. Maria helped, her hands raw and trembling. When the last grave was filled, Carter drove a stick into the earth and tied a strip of white cloth around it. The wind caught it, fluttering softly like a signal to the lost. Maria approached him. "You will go now?" He nodded. "Orders say we move north." She looked down at the graves, then back at him. "They fed us," she said quietly. "We will remember." He wanted to say something, but words felt small against the weight of everything left unsaid. Instead, he reached into his pack and handed her a can of rations and a tin cup. "For the children," he said. Maria took them with shaking hands. Rosa peeked out from behind her, eyes bright despite the soot. "Ciao, friend," she said in careful English. Carter smiled faintly. "Ciao, little one." As he turned to leave, he looked once more at the graves, at the fluttering cloth, at the faces of the living among the ruins. The war would move on, dragging them all with it. But something of that night would remain here, a trace of warmth amid the ashes, a memory of strangers who had chosen mercy over fear. The road north waited, silent and gray. The men climbed into their trucks, engines coughing to life. Carter took the driver's seat, glancing once more at the village as it faded behind the curve of the hill. He could still hear Rosa's laughter in the rain, faint but unbroken, like the echo of a promise that refused to die. The war did not end with victory, it ended with silence. Months had passed since San Lorenzo, yet Sergeant William Carter still carried its echoes in his chest, the ringing bell, the taste of ash, the sight of Morales falling beside the ruined church. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Maria's face, pale in the flickering light of that burning night. The war had moved north, then west, then finally to Berlin, but the ghosts had followed him everywhere. Now it was spring of 1945. The guns were quiet. The fields of Italy had begun to bloom again, though beneath the flowers lay bones that would never be found. Carter walked those roads not as a soldier anymore, but as something else, something emptied and searching. He returned to San Lorenzo on a gray morning when the mist still clung to the hills. The village looked smaller than he remembered, half rebuilt, half ruined. Smoke rose from a few chimneys. Chickens picked through the dust near the fountain. And there, near the old church wall, stood Maria. She turned when she heard his boots. For a long moment, neither spoke. The years between them were visible in every line of their faces, in the quiet weight behind their eyes. "You came back," she said finally. "I said I would," Carter replied. He hadn't, not in words. But maybe something in his silence back then had promised it. Maria wiped her hands on her apron, stepping closer. "We didn't think you'd remember." "I couldn't forget," he said. "Not this place. Not you." Behind her, Luca appeared, taller now, lean from work, but his eyes the same. He nodded respectfully, a man where a boy had stood. Rosa came running from the doorway, laughing, her hair tied back with a red ribbon. When she reached Carter, she stopped suddenly, unsure whether to embrace him or salute. He smiled and knelt. "You've grown," he said. "And you still remember English?" "A little," she said proudly. "And I remember you." Her words hit him harder than any bullet ever had. Maria invited him inside. The house was patched with stone and timber, rebuilt by careful, stubborn hands. A single photograph hung on the wall, Morales, grinning, his arms slung around Carter's shoulders. Below it, a candle burned. Carter stared at it for a long time. "Where did you get that?" "After you left, some soldiers came through," Maria explained. "They said you'd gone home. One of them gave us this. He said Morales would have wanted it here." Carter nodded, throat tight. He would have liked that. They ate together at the small table, a meal of bread, beans, and wine. It was simple, but it felt sacred. Between bites, Carter spoke softly about what had happened after they left, the march through Germany, the liberation of the camps, the day the war finally stopped. He told it without drama, each word measured, heavy with memory. Maria listened, eyes downcast. "And now?" she asked. "What will you do?" He looked at his hands, calloused and still stained with faint traces of oil and earth. "I'm not sure. I thought I'd come back and maybe, make peace with it all." "Does peace come just by coming back?" she asked. He hesitated. "No. But maybe it starts there." Outside, the wind carried the scent of spring, fresh grass, wet earth, the faint sweetness of blooming olive trees. The same wind rustled through the graveyard behind the church. Carter asked if he might visit. Maria nodded. The graves were marked by wooden crosses, weathered and leaning. Some names were still legible, others had faded into the grain. He found Morales easily, the white strip of cloth he'd tied around the marker still fluttered, frayed but unbroken. Kneeling, he brushed the dirt from the base and placed a new stone there. "Hey, buddy," he murmured. "You wouldn't believe this place now. Kids laughing. Bread baking again. Guess we did something right after all." The wind shifted, and he could almost hear Morales's chuckle in it, the same half-mocking laugh that had filled the trenches. Maria came to stand beside him. "Luca built that wall," she said softly, pointing to the repaired church. "He says it's to keep the past from falling apart." Carter smiled faintly. "Smart kid. He learned from you," she said. He looked at her, unsure how to answer. There was gratitude in her tone, but also something else, something unspoken that neither dared name. As the afternoon waned, Carter walked through the village once more. He passed the bakery, now open again, its scent filling the air. Children played in the square, their laughter echoing against the stones. The fountain had water again, trickling clear and cold. The war had scarred the land, but it had not killed it. That night, the villagers gathered in the square for a small celebration. Someone had slaughtered a goat, someone else brought wine. There was music, laughter, a strange sense of joy rising from the ashes. Carter sat near the fire, watching Rosa dance with the other children, her feet moving in a blur of life. Maria joined him, holding 2 cups of wine. She handed him one. "To the living," she said. He raised his cup. "And to the ones who helped us stay that way." They drank. The fire crackled. For a moment, the world felt almost whole again. But as the music faded, Maria turned to him, her voice quieter. "You'll go soon, won't you?" Carter looked into the flames. "I have to. My family's waiting. And there's work to do back home." She nodded slowly, though her eyes glistened. "Then take this with you." She reached into her apron and pulled out a small wooden carving, a dove, roughly shaped but beautifully made. "Luca carved it. For luck." He took it gently, feeling the smooth grain beneath his fingers. Tell him it worked already. Maria smiled. He'll be proud. The next morning, Carter prepared to leave. The village gathered quietly to see him off. Rosa hugged him tightly, whispering, "Don't forget us." "Never," he promised. Luka shook his hand like a grown man. "When I'm old enough," he said, "I'll go where you went. I'll help others too." Carter nodded, pride and sorrow mixing in his chest. "Then you'll do just fine." Maria walked him to the edge of the road. The hill stretched out before them, green and gold under the morning sun. For a long time, they stood in silence. "When you first came here," she said softly, "we thought you were the enemy." "I was," he admitted. "Until I realized hunger doesn't care what side you're on." She looked at him, eyes searching his face. "And now?" He took a deep breath, letting the wind wash over him. "Now I think maybe we were all just trying to survive the same storm." She nodded. "Then may you find peace where it's calmer." He smiled faintly. "You too." They didn't say goodbye. Instead, Maria simply touched his hand, brief but steady. Then she turned back toward the village, toward the smoke and the sound of morning life returning. Carter watched her until she vanished between the houses. Then he started walking. The road wound through olive groves and low hills, the sun climbing higher with each step. He didn't look back again, but he carried the village with him, the smell of rain on stone, the sound of Rosa's laughter, the weight of Morales's grave, and the warmth of bread shared among the starving. Years later, in a quiet town in Pennsylvania, William Carter would tell the story to his children. He'd sit by the fire, a cup of coffee in hand, the little wooden dove resting on the mantelpiece. He'd speak not of battles or victories, but of the night they fed the hungry, of a woman who risked everything for others, of a village that refused to die. His son once asked, "Was it worth it, Dad? Everything you saw?" Carter thought for a long time before answering. "War takes everything," he said finally. "But sometimes, in the middle of all that ruin, you find a piece of what it means to be human. And if you hold on to that, maybe that's worth something." He never returned to Italy again, but every spring he sent a letter addressed to San Lorenzo. Most went unanswered. Some came back unopened. But one year, an envelope arrived with a single photograph inside, Maria, older but smiling, standing in front of a rebuilt fountain. Rosa and Luka stood beside her, grown and strong. On the back, written in careful English, were 4 words, "We still remember you." Carter held the photo for a long time. The world outside was quiet, peaceful in a way that once would have felt impossible. He placed the photograph beside the wooden dove, both framed in the firelight. Outside, the night wind rustled the trees. Somewhere far away, bells rang, soft, distant, but unmistakable. For a moment, he was back there again, the rain, the ruins, the laughter of the children, the taste of hope in a world that had forgotten it. He closed his eyes. The echoes no longer hurt. They were part of him now, like scars that had learned to heal. And as the fire burned low, Sergeant William Carter whispered the same words he had written long ago in a soldier's notebook, words meant for a world still learning how to forgive itself. Maybe war isn't about who wins, but who's left to remember.